Hey guys, what's going on? Blaine back for another Netflix review, and today I'm going to be talking about Strip Down, Rise Up. Strip Down, Rise Up is a documentary in which the main subject focuses on the health benefits surrounding pole dancing. And I know what you're thinking. Pole dancing? Healthy? Really? And I have to admit, I was very skeptical going into this movie. I didn't think people would actually take pole dancing so seriously, but as it turns out, not only do people take it seriously, in fact for some people, it's their whole livelihood. The film is presented by two people, Sheila Kelley, an actress who works at her S Factor studio in New York, and Amy Bond, a lawyer who works at SFP&D, I think it's called, in San Francisco. The film goes back and forth between these two studios, although I think it focuses more on Sheila's side of things, as it shows all these group of women that are applying to be in Sheila's program right from the beginning up into the end, which is where the film ends. But there's also a lot of focus given to Amy Bond's studio as well. I felt for the lack of focus that they had with people attending her studio, they made up for it with all the detail that they spent going into Amy Bond's life that she had as a teenager, as a Mormon, going into adulthood, living in LA by herself, and how she got involved in all kinds of sex work in order to pay the bills, leading to her eventually discovering pole dancing. I was very shocked to see a professional like a lawyer get involved with something that has such a stigma like pole dancing, but I guess that's why they made this documentary anyway, to kind of shatter that stigma, or at least try to. As far as Sheila Studio is concerned, the spotlight falls on the people who are attending her program. There are so many diverse people attending that particular class that it would take too long to go in depth into every single one of them. But if I had to pick my favorite attendee of the program, it would have to be Evelyn. At least I think that's what her name is, if it's the person I'm thinking about. She's the one who works at the chocolate shop, and it shows her right at the very beginning, and it's basically a Kickstarter for the rest of the events that happen in the documentary. She just has a very tragic background. Her husband died, and she can't get over the trauma as a result of that, so she turns to pole dancing despite being severely overweight and being self-conscious of her body. She joins that program in an attempt to reclaim her femininity. And I just love how she transformed over the course of the story as she became more confident in her body, as well as slowly overcoming the trauma that she had as a result of her husband's passing. I do like that it focuses on body positivity and acceptance. There seems to be a general idea that anyone who dances on poles is only doing it to show off their bodies, when the reality of it is dancing on a pole is no different than dancing on a stage or whatever place you decide to dance in. Ultimately, it's an art form and it should be recognized as such. And we see a variety of women that are taking part in all these pole dances, and even some men in some cases, and they don't really care about the shape of their bodies. They're just doing it because they want to cut loose and release all that pent-up energy they've had built up from whatever day it was that they had. So I think this movie does a great job in recognizing pole dancing not just as something that's purely sexual, but something that can also be a great hobby to participate in. Not necessarily a hobby that exists for everyone, but then again, not every hobby is for everyone. It just kind of depends on what you want out of your life. That being said, I do think that it focuses on body positivity sometimes a little bit to a fault. Some of the women on this program are really overweight, and I felt scared for some of the women who were dancing on the poles that were overweight, because I was always worried, wondering whether or not the pole would actually stay put or fall down and result in a catastrophic injury. I also noticed a few pregnant women pole dance in this film. Even as other people were doing their own dances, they were just continuing to practice despite how big their bellies were. And to be very honest, if I were a pregnant woman, if I were in their shoes, the very last thing I would be doing was put my baby in jeopardy by pole dancing. But all the girls around these pregnant women, they just brush it off like everything's okay, and sometimes they cheer in these particular cases when people are dancing, when I personally felt that they shouldn't have been doing that. Accepting your body for what it is fine to a point, but I also think that you shouldn't be ignoring issues that do exist. Something else I noticed when watching this film was that a lot of these women seem to be carrying around a ton of trauma. I know I already talked about Evelyn a bit and how she's still reeling from the death of her husband, but there were so many other people that were suffering from all sorts of tragedies in this movie. A good majority of these women had suffered from sexual assault or even rape in extreme cases. I think there was one woman that was overcoming a drug addiction as well. And there were a few people who, for religious reasons, they didn't really feel comfortable with their bodies and they felt really restricted in what they could do with their free time. And all these women just don't really know how to go about dealing with all these issues that they're having, but they all relate to the one common ground that is their interest in pole dancing. And Sheila in particular really wants to encourage these women to try and overcome their trauma by accepting the pain that they're experiencing and just letting it all out, just basically opening the floodgates and unleashing the kraken of their emotions. I like that she encourages the idea that in order to get over your trauma, you have to acknowledge it and move through it, but at the same time, I felt like it was a little bit weird that every single woman seemed to have some sort of underlying issue. There was actually one woman that stuck out to me. Her name was Amber, and she just plain got into pole dancing because she was just interested in pole dancing. She didn't really have any issues plaguing her or bothering her. She just wanted to try it out and see how it was. But she was the one woman in this film that I recall who was interested in pole dancing just for the sake of trying out pole dancing, just to do something new. Every other woman around her seemed to be interested in pole dancing as a way to heal from their trauma. And I felt it was just a little bit unrealistic to expect only one woman, or at least only show one woman, that was interested in pole dancing for the sake of trying it out as a hobby and seeing how it would be. And that woman actually ends up quitting the program because all these women end up just sitting on the floor crying a lot about all the trauma they're experiencing, and at times it felt like less of a pole dancing group and more of a group therapy session. Which again, if that's what Sheila Kelly is going for, is fine, but I don't really think it did any favors to try and elevate the medium of pole dancing. They do have a few mental health professionals like psychologists and that here and there, but they don't really feature them there long enough to kind of really bring everything in, so to speak. They don't really show the psychologists and all those other people really examining these issues that these women are clearly having in depth. They just kind of gloss over them, and then everything else just focuses on them crying on their dance floors. And that kind of sounds mean for me to say, and I'm not trying to denigrate them at all, but I felt that it was really distracting considering that the whole point was to be about pole dancing, but for some reason it takes this sort of spiritual side of things. The film does claim to not sexualize the whole pole dancing aspect and basically trying to eliminate the stigma of such, which is fine. I like, again, that they do that sort of thing, trying to eliminate all the stigma that's associated with pole dancing and how sex workers are normally the people, strippers, that sort of thing, that are associated with that type of thing. But at the same time, I feel like they just flat out ignore the sex working aspect. Whenever they do talk about sex work, it's usually about pornography or something extreme, rather than pole dancing, which in my opinion is a pretty tame thing by comparison. They sort of get into this kind of thing a little bit with Amy Bond's side of things and how she used to be involved in pornography as Wendy James, but I don't think they got into it as much detail as they should have. I think if you're going to make a documentary about pole dancing, you should at least try to get a little bit into why there is a stigma, and in this case, you would definitely need to talk about the strippers and whatever other sort of sex workers are involved with poles. Again, not really a bad thing if you are a stripper and pole dance for money, that sort of thing, but it's not really something you can ignore either. You should be able to acknowledge that there is a sexual history attached to this art. Something that bothered me about this film a little bit too was that it claimed to be about a sisterhood, really providing a safe space for women, which I absolutely have no problem with at all. I love that there is a safe space for that sort of thing. But there are plenty of scenes in the film where it shows men doing the same dance drills that the women in their class are doing too, and it's like, what? Sheila Kelly in the film goes on and on about this idea of the masculine mind, the masculine gaze, and how we need to subvert that and basically overcome the expectations that the masculine mind has of the art of pole dancing. But I think you're hurting the overall message behind that whenever you're showing men who happen to be doing the exact same thing as women do. So it's not so much a sisterhood anymore. Although that's more on Amy Bond's side of things. We don't really see any men doing any dances with the women as far as Sheila Kelly's S Factor studio is concerned. But since they were both included in this film, I had to bring it up that the women in, as far as Amy Bond's case was concerned, were no longer able to escape that masculine gaze because they happen to be doing the same dances as the women are. Overall, I think the general message behind Strip Down, Rise Up is good, but not without its flaws. I actually went into this movie thinking that I was going to hate it a lot more than I actually did. It's currently rated at like 2.8 out of 10 or something like that on IMDb, so I thought that it was going to be like basically some sort of man-hating pro-feminist movie. Not necessarily that I'm against feminism or anything like that, but I usually don't watch trailers for movies anyway, so whenever I see ratings like that, I automatically assume that there's going to be some sort of negative vibe attached to the overall project. But I was very impressed to learn upon watching this movie from beginning to end that there's a very positive message behind the idea of the medium of pole dancing being for anyone, regardless of how old you are, what shape your body is in, how fit you are. all those sorts of things. It was great to see this documentary putting a positive spin as far as the art of pole dancing was concerned. But all the little things like ignoring the sexual history behind pole dancing to begin with, all the crying that happens in the movie, seriously, there's a ton of crying that happens, and this idea of the masculine gaze when there are men that are taking their masculine gazes with them in the dance studios, all these little things really just distracted me from the overall narrative. Overall, it's not a terrible documentary, but it's not all that fantastic either. It's just kind of middle of the road. I feel like for every good thing I could say about it, there's a bad thing associated with it as well. So ultimately, your enjoyment of this film will depend on how much you enjoy the idea of pole dancing. And if you are looking for a documentary that's about something completely different as far as body art is concerned, the art of moving your body and trying to find some sort of intrinsic meaning behind it, then I think you'll like it. Just be prepared for a lot of drama when watching it. Anyways, guys, that's going to be my review of Strip Down, Rise Up. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. And as always, stay tuned for the next part, where next time I review the Korean space comedy, Space Sweepers. Bye-bye.